Such a decision can be made in 10 to 15 years' time from now. Again, this report can be made available to the committee. Chair, I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Gabrielle, who will take a look at the economic risks.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to present these views. The production of gas reserves in South Africa, as this bill attempts to enable and promote, presents a range of economic risks for South Africa. And I'm going to speak to stranded assets first, reminding that stranded assets are those that at some time prior to the end of their economic life are no longer able to earn an economic return. So we're therefore considering the lifetime of gas production assets and the energy transition timeline, both of which appear to be competing and incongruent with one another. And we've in 2021 more than ever before. There's this race to net zero by 2050, or the race to completely negate the greenhouse gas emissions caused by human activity, and the seemingly opposing race of the oil and gas industry to develop fossil fuel reserves. As Comrade Samane said earlier, the race to extract fossil fuels in our country really does undermine the South African government's own and its low emission development strategy. Now, the risk posed by stranded assets decarbonization laws in South Africa continue to get applied more vigorously, and as policies, targets, and financial pressures become more restrictive, we foresee that there's a very real risk that gas infrastructure and developments will no longer be viable and will indeed be illegal to operate long before the end of their economic timeline or lifespan. And if we take the one example of Total producing gas reserves or intending to produce gas reserves in Bulpada and Leipat, potentially by 2028 reaching first gas. 2028 plus a conservative 30-year lifespan takes us to 2058. With the net zero intention of South Africa, that would mean the asset being stranded potentially 10 years prior to the end of its lifespan, which is an incredible risk for South Africa, the public, and those companies. Now, this conversation really around stranded assets and the prediction thereof needs to look to international experiences and international research around assets that are already being stranded. The Carbon Tracker platform, for one, notes that there's already examples of international coal mines, coal and gas power plants, and other hydrocarbon reserves that have become stranded by the low carbon transition, especially in the global north. And similarly, in May of this year, the International Energy Agency, which we must note has previously been an oil and gas centric organization, but they themselves concluded that the exploitation and development of new oil and gas fuels must stop this year, and no coal-fired power stations must be built in order for the world to stay within safe limits of global heating and meet the goal of net zero emissions by 2050. And it's just so interesting to look at that being the position that the IEA is taking and position that an oil and gas centric organization is taking. And this further motivates that this bill is not needed because new gas production is heavily opposed on the local, as we've seen more than ever in the previous months, and the national and the international stages. I'm now going to speak to carbon border taxes. So this really means that goods and services created using fossil fuel energy are going to have a higher carbon footprint due to the direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions caused in their production. The European Union introduced the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism recently, which will levy a fee on all imports based on their carbon footprint. And an extensive gas-powered electricity system and a fossil fuel-powered industrial heating system will ensure that our exporters are heavily penalized and their competitiveness in the international industry is competitiveness on the international industry is at risk. Now, touching on climate financing, we've seen this recently at COP26. There are a range of climate and transition financing mechanisms becoming available from the global north for countries that are embracing and accelerating decarbonization policies and measures. And South Africa particularly is viewed as an attractive destination for this financing. But in order to remain attractive to the global north for these financing opportunities, we need to send the right signals by embracing strong emission reduction measures and avoiding expanding our carbon-intensive fossil fuel use, such as gas. This energy transition and the climate financing is vital to funding our mitigation and adaptation measures and assist with implementing South Africa's just energy transition. Sort of linked to the availability of climate financing and how we're viewed by the international stage is our reputational risk. With an extensive rollout of gas infrastructure, energy generations and services brings with it a reputational risk, whereby South Africa is seen as a reckless and unnecessarily intensive carbon emitter, and this would compromise our investment opportunities and deprive the economy of growth opportunities. Finally, to touch on litigation risk, this again we've seen in 2021 more than ever before, as more stakeholders align with the imperatives of halting global warming. The risk of climate litigation increases. There have been more than 1,000 climate litigation cases launched around the world between 2015 and 2020. And climate activists everywhere are using courts to hold big emitters accountable. There have been landmark successes in recent months, and these suggest a trend being set to continue as the imperative to slash emissions and ditch fossil fuels grows even greater. So internationally, over the last 2 years, we've seen a trend in courts telling national governments specifically that they are not doing enough to reduce their country's greenhouse gas emissions. At home in South Africa, our courts have already recognized that new coal-fired power stations and developments are contrary to climate change imperatives, and the ever-building climate science relating to gas will result in a similar movement against gas and legal challenges being brought to gas, big emitters, and the government to stop the developments from going ahead. Thank you, Brandon, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Gabrielle. In terms of physical risk, the IPCC report released in August indicates that the scientific community is more certain than ever about the impacts of global warming, the links between greenhouse gas emissions and warming, and the severity and the timescales of these impacts. The impacts are well described in our written submission, and we're just going to add here the key findings from this IPCC report as they relate to South Africa. Under all scenarios, South Africa is going to experience increasing heat waves and extreme hot weather events. South Africa is one of the relatively few regions globally that is going to experience a decrease in mean average rainfall and an increase in droughts as a result of global warming. Soil moisture levels are therefore going to decrease. And this is very alarming news given that we are a water scarce country. Rainfall events are going to increase. So while the overall rainfall goes down.
There'll be 2 minutes left now.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
While overall rainfall goes down, when it does rain, it rains more severely, leading to flooding risk. And there are also risks of tropical storm impacts for northern KZN and Limpopo Valley. These in turn give rise to certain risks like food insecurity and the viability of the agricultural sector, shortages of clean water, a badly handled transition to low carbon energy, heat stress, and disrupted ecosystems and loss of biodiversity. South Africa is already falling behind in its global obligations to address climate change, and our NDCs are only just within the 2-degree range. And the upper range of our NDCs falls well short of the necessary 1.5 degrees. So the nature of climate change is such that the impacts are widespread and severe, and it is therefore essential that our comments that relate to public participation, adequate consultation, and administrative justice are taken into account. And all in all, we need to see this bill dramatically different in order to ensure the socio-economic and environmentally sustainable development. We need to manage the economic risk that comes out of this activity. We need to elevate and center climate change considerations. Honorable members, I know there's a view that perhaps says that climate change concerns should sit with the DFFE and the Climate Change Act. But if we look at the climate change bill, it calls for unprecedented levels of collaboration across departments and ministries, and it calls for each sector to take its share of responsibility in dealing with climate change. And therefore, we believe that this bill also needs to center climate change, and that the administrative justice considerations are strengthened given the severity of the impacts on all levels of our society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You are exactly on point, on time. Who's next is Miss Marilyn Lilly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It's exactly 8 minutes past. It means by past you must be done. 18 minutes past. Thank you.
Thank you to the Chairman and members of the Portfolio Committee for the opportunity to expand on the issues and concerns that are raised in my written submissions on the Gas Amendment Bill, and for considering this input in your evaluation of the bill. I'm a member of the public and have followed the Karoo fracking issue since 2011 and continue to follow fracking and other gas-related projects, activities and impacts in South Africa and elsewhere. Fracking has been banned in many countries. California is to ban fracking in 2024 and is already cutting back on issuing new permits. Have the relevant committees, ministers and departments researched the reasons why these countries ban fracking? The issues that I cover with the science, methane emissions, IPCC climate change report, human rights, and health-related topics are easily accessible in the public domain. I include links and further reading for the committee for easy access to the information. Once one hears, one cannot unhear. Once one knows, one cannot unknow. This science and information may be useful also for the committee in its oversight and monitoring role over the Minister and Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. When we look at costs, we also need to look at the costs to the climate and to the impacted and affected people who live in mining affected areas, not only the monetary costs. With South Africa's dash for gas, an increasing number of permit applications for various onshore and offshore gas projects, developments, and the proposed importation of methane, such as the proposed car power ships with a 20-year contract that would be supplied with imported natural gas. With imported natural gas, we need to be cognitive of the health, environment, and other impacts suffered by people and communities where the fracking has taken place to provide us with imported gas. They are collateral damage and sacrifice zones, as people and communities would also be in South Africa if fracking is permitted. Are fracking permit exploration applications lining up in South Africa? The other one is the current seismic survey permits of the east coast of South Africa, and countrywide public protests against offshore and oil and gas drilling, which is precursor to offshore oil and gas development, and the wide national and international media coverage. The mega methane 5,000 gas pipeline network around our country through farming areas and through 140 municipalities with multiple industrial sized compressor stations built along its length that vent gas, and this will tie South Africa into decades of fossil fuel production. and greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, the first slide, please. If Mr. Kotzer could put that on. Thank you. Part of the preamble of the Gas Amendment Bill states that the purpose of the amendment is to provide for socio-economic and environmentally sustainable development and to facilitate gas infrastructure development and investment. This statement does not acknowledge the fact that gas is a fossil fuel and that the extraction, distribution, processing, and consumption of this resource is a key and primary driver of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. This further places the bill and South Africa directly at odds with the Paris Climate Agreement, to which South Africa is a signatory, which requires divestment from and a reduction in the extraction of all fossil fuels. And this bill seeks to facilitate further investments in the gas sector. Our challenge is, will awareness in South Africa of the code red level of our present climate crisis lead to action, to our reduction of gas-related operations and their global warming emissions, along with the reduction of other fossil fuels operation and our dependency? Or will South Africa continue to promote the development of the gas industry, as in the preamble of the bill, and with this knowingly increase our global warming greenhouse gas emissions? Will South Africa be on the right side of climate change and the right side of history? Or will South Africa be found to be on the wrong side of climate change and the wrong side of history? This committee, with its oversight role, has very important decisions to make. Next slide, please. This gas amendment bill is focused on infrastructure, transmission, storage, and related activities and processes. The health and pollution risks and impacts are also important during the fugitive emissions at each stage of the processing and transmission phase and operations. The many related industrial facilities, pipelines, compressor stations, waste disposal, transport, etc., and not only during the drilling and production phase. We cannot look at these two phases in isolation from each other. These risks and impacts cover the entire process from exploration to end usage, the entire lifetime of gas. Next, thank you. In the IPCC report on the 7th of August 2021, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is the United Nations body for assessing the science related to climate change. Some key points in the report: South Africa is a climate change hotspot. Limiting other greenhouse gases and air pollutants, especially methane, could have benefits both for health and the climate. Cutting methane is the strongest lever we have to slow climate change over the next 25 years. We need international cooperation to urgently reduce methane emissions as much as possible this decade. The surge in methane is partly due to the increase of use of fossil fuels, especially gas produced by fracking. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Methane is a big new enemy in the battle over climate change. For the first time, the IPCC has focused on the need to drive down methane emissions. Countries need to figure out ways to make strong, rapid, and sustained reductions in methane emissions, in addition to ramping down CO2. And then Professor Francois Engelbrecht, BIT's Global Change Institute, South African climate scientist, was one of the lead authors of the IPCC report. And he gave a presentation, Implications for South Africa, for Africa and South Africa. The most recent science that has come out of the recently published IPCC report on climate change. It was hosted by the Climate Change Charter, EFS, BITS, and COPAC. Next slide, please. The work undertaken by Sharon Wilson with Earthworks in detecting unseen emissions from gas infrastructures using a flow camera is internationally recognized. Sharon Wilson says, there would be no fracking boom if you could see through my lens. I want everyone to see oil and gas through my lens. Methane from oil and gas is accelerating climate change. There's a video of the emissions from a gas facility, unseen to the naked eye, but is seen through a flow camera that is available for you to watch. There are more videos of emissions from gas facilities captured with a flow camera can be seen on Earthworks YouTube channel. The flow camera, you can see what it is. It uses state-of-the-art independently verified technology and is capable of detecting volatile organic compounds, VOCs, including known carcinogens and greenhouse gases. Next slide, please.
Sorry, ma'am. Let me correct my mistake again. You are supposed to be 28 minutes, not 28 minutes past, not 18 minutes past. Sorry. Apologies on that.
Thank you. The infrared flow camera detects greenhouse gas venting, fugitive emissions, and VOCs from gas facilities. Out of sight is not out of harm's way. Concerns over fracking spread far beyond well pad and gas or oil production. After gas or oil is brought to the surface, the industry needs a variety of equipment and facilities to process, transport, and deliver both oil and gas and their spin-off products from production to markets. And the cycle of pollution taken together, all this infrastructure can have wide-ranging impacts on communities and the environment. During the drilling, fracking, and extraction processes, significant amounts of fugitive gas emissions take place with serious implications for air pollution, climate change, and human health. Volatile organic compounds are emitted as gases from certain solids or liquids. Benzene, toluene, ethyl benzene, and xylenes are naturally present in many hydrocarbon deposits and may be present in drilling and fracking chemicals. These VOCs can cause symptoms such as headache, loss of coordination, and damage to the liver, kidneys. Benzene is a carcinogen as well. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Health and fracking. Should the medical profession be concerned? In the South African Medical Journal in 2014, the authors wrote, health and fracking. Should the medical professions be concerned? Rachel Mass, Jolyn Minnar, and Bob Mash were the authors. These health concerns have not yet been fully addressed in policy making, and the authors recommend that the voice of health professions should be part of the public debate on fracking, and that a full health impact assessment be required before companies are given the go-ahead to drill. In 2013, Professor Margaret Rafferty said that any initiation or further expansion of unconventional gas drilling must be preceded by a comprehensive health impact assessment. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Fracking is a public health issue, a human rights issue, an environmental justice issue, and a climate justice issue. The Constitution is the supreme law in South Africa. The environment and citizens need to be protected in all the many aspects and activities of fossil fuel operations. And environment, everyone has a right to an environment that is not harmful to their health and well-being, and to have the environment protected for the benefit of present and future generations through reasonable legislative and other measures that prevent pollution and ecological degradation, promote conservation, and secure ecologically sustainable development and use of natural resources. Everyone has a right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being. In the case of children, a child's best interest are of paramount importance in every matter concerning the child. Thank you. Next slide, please. The endocrine disruptor exchange. What is in the emissions from fracking oil and gas operations, and how do they affect us? TEDx, the endocrine disruption exchange, was pioneered by the late Dr. Theo Colburn. This research remains relevant to date. The TEDx oil and gas program pioneered the identification of health effects associated with unconventional oil and gas operations known as fracking. Many endocrine disruptors originate with fossil fuel extraction. Endocrine disrupting chemicals are chemicals that interfere with normal hormone action. The endocrine system is the body's exquisitely balanced system of glands, organs, and hormones that regulate such vital functions as body growth, response to stress, sexual development, production of insulin, and utilization of glucose, metabolism, neurodevelopment, intelligence, behavior, sleep patterns, blood pressure, and ability to reproduce. Chemicals that disrupt hormone function can have substantial and sometimes permanent impacts on health. Next slide, please. TEDx's oil and gas spreadsheets. You can find research related to the health impacts of chemicals used in unconventional oil and gas operations, including drilling, fracturing, and waste removal. TEDx's spreadsheets are tools for government and non-government organizations, the public, and scientists to have easy access to relevant research. In 2011, a report and list of 750 chemicals used in hydraulic fracturing was published by the United States House of Representatives Committee on Energy and Commerce. Chemicals used in hydraulic fracturing. This is easily available to be opened. and the public can have easy access to see that report. Next, please. I present to this committee today the Compendium of Scientific, Medical, and Media Findings demonstrating risks and harms of fracking, unconventional gas, and oil extraction, the 7th edition, December 2020. The 8th edition is due to be published and launched shortly. The Compendium is a fully referenced compilation of evidence outlining the risks and harms of fracking. It is a public open access document that is housed on the websites of concerned health professionals in New York and Physicians for Social Responsibility. The compendium is organized to be accessible to public officials, researchers, journalists, and the public at large. And there's more that can be looked at in there. It's a fully researchable and near-exhaustive citation database of peer-reviewed journal articles pertaining to shale gas and oil extraction, the repository for oil and gas energy research that was developed by PSE, physicians, scientists, and engineers, and is housed on their website. Next slide, please. New additions that will be included in the upcoming 8th edition of the compendium. I'm very grateful to Dr. Sandra Steingraber and Dr. Makami Orenstein, two of the founders and lead authors of the compendium, who shared with me some of the titles, the new research that will be included in the new compendium, still to be launched. Some of the titles are, in 2021, you can see this very latest research. Fracking activities pose significant risks to the public health profile across the Oklahoma population, according to a unique study using a comprehensive health profile of the population across 76 counties over 20 years, from 1998 to 2017. These are the titles of the research. Air pollution, methane superemitters, and oil and gas wells in Northern Carolina, the relationship with migraine, headaches, prevalence, and exacerbation. Residential proximity to oil and gas drilling linked to lower birth weights in newborns. A Texas-based study on flaring found links between childhood asthma hospitalizations and both unconventional and conventional gas development. Next slide, please. A few of the topics, emerging trends in the compendium, a few of the topic headings. And if you go to the topic headings, clicking on any topic will take you straight to that section. Public health problems associated with drilling and fracking include poor birth outcomes, respiratory impacts, cancer, heart disease, and mental health impacts. Regulations are simply not capable of preventing harm. Drilling and fracking activities bring naturally occurring radioactive materials to the surface. Regulations cannot prevent air pollution. Regulations cannot stop wells from leaking. Fracking and natural gas are incompatible with climate solutions. So these are just some of the topic headings. Next slide, please. Health professionals are increasingly calling for bans or moratoria on fracking based on a range of health hazards and as reviews of the data confirm evidence for harm. Thank you. Next slide, number 15. The next one. Thank you. Drilling and fracking activities bring naturally occurring radioactive materials to the surface. Regulations cannot stop radioactive emissions. There's radiation at every stage of fracking and related facilities and operations, even in one's kitchen using gas to cook with. This is part of the reason, apart from geology, why radon test kits are featured in many United States homes. There's no known way to clean toxic radioactive frack flowback and waste to any safe levels for humans or the environment. Various occupational health and safety acts in South Africa apply to workers dealing with hazardous chemicals and radioactive wastes. But importantly, what rights and health and safety legislation in South Africa apply to the public and communities similarly exposed to the known hazardous toxic chemicals and radioactivity from industrial oil and gas operations and infrastructures where communities live. We already know that there are many mining affected communities who are suffering health and other impacts. On the basis of the science and evidence, especially of natural gas and methane impacts, I propose, the recommendations that I propose are that the Committees on Mineral Resources and Energy, also Health, Environment, Forest and Fisheries, Water and Sanitation, Human Rights Commission, NERSA, the related ministers, departments, PASA, the energy regulator, and any other related body in gas and fossil fuel affairs due to the many known impacts of gas activities and operations. Note, record, and file the compendium for future reference, compendium of scientific, medical, and media findings demonstrating risks and harms of fracking and conventional gas and oil extraction. That the above committees, ministers, departments, and any other bodies involved in assessing or fossil fuel permit applications, and especially natural gas, take into account the contents of the compendium, adopt the precautionary principle until the known health issues and being impacts are properly researched and proved safe for humans, the environment, and for the climate, and state a moratorium on fracking, on any fracking permits, including coal seam gas fracking, that a timeline of 6 months be given to address a policy on reducing gas development and dependency in South Africa, and especially methane-related operations, that a timeline of 6 months be given to address the incorporation of a health impact assessment in assessing all fossil fuel permit applications, and especially gas fracking operations and all related infrastructures upstream and downstream. Due diligence requires that a health impact assessment be undertaken. Next slide, please. All wells eventually leak, casings and pipes rust, cement crumbles, and chemicals leach into groundwater. Thank you. From the current information and science that we have on climate change, methane's role, the IPC report, I believe that South Africa cannot afford to embark on new gas infrastructure development, especially methane-related developments. I would also like to add, of concern from reports, apparently it may appear that some people allegedly may not have been able to enter some of the venues where these public hearings were recently held, or allegedly, apparently, maybe were prevented from entering some of the venues. If this may be so, will all such people be given the opportunity to make their oral input and to take part in the public participation process and have their say on this bill, their democratic right to be heard? I thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Exactly on time. We are, if I'm not mistaken, on is it Tetra 4? Yes.
That's correct.
Tetra 4. You take us to 10 to 12.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and honorable members. My name is Will Fritz. I am the legal counsel and representative for Tetra 4. Just a bit of an introduction. Tetra 4 is an emerging natural gas producer currently developing the Virginia Gas Project. It is the holder of the first and only onshore production right, as well as various exploration rights covering 187,000 hectares gas field across Welcome, Virginia, and Tennyson in the Free State. Currently produces compressed natural gas through its pilot plant and intends to produce liquid natural gas and liquid helium through its production right and development of the Virginia Gas Project. Tetra 4 extends its thanks to the Portfolio Committee on the Mineral Resources and Energy for giving Tetra 4 the opportunity to consult and comment on the gas amendment bill. And I'll hand you over to my learned colleague, Mr. Francois Hubert, to take you through the presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and the panel. Thank you for hosting us this morning. We will try and focus on the regulatory and the specific provisions within the proposed amendment bill, and specifically how this submission that we've written submission can be supported by just taking you through our main comments on the proposed wording of the bill. So what we're going to do is we're going to speak about mostly about the types of increases in the gas that are to be regulated under the amendment bill, some issues with definitions, the provision relating to registration requirements, clarity regarding the regulation of production activities, as well as the exclusivity provisions, and then we will end with some comments on the tariffs, the proposed tariff amendments. So in terms of the increase in the types of gases that are regulated, currently the Gas Act focuses on the regulation of piped hydrocarbon gases, as the current definition of gas under the Gas Act is defined as all hydrocarbon gases transported by pipeline. Similarly, the preamble of the Gas Act refers to the promotion of the orderly development of the piped gas industry. It's our emphasis. But in accordance with the amendment bill, on the other hand, the amendment seeks to regulate all hydrocarbon gases, whether they are transported by pipeline or not, as the proposed definition of gas under the amendment bill no longer refers to gases transported by pipeline. There's also no reference to pipe gas in the proposed definition of distribution and the preamble of the amendment bill, which simply refers to the orderly development of the gas industry. And the proposed definition of gas in the amendment bill also expressly refers to regasified liquid petroleum gas, whereas the current definition in the Gas Act only refers to regasified liquid natural gas, with a little bit of our emphasis. The proposed definition would, in our view, create an ambiguous licensing and regulatory regime for domestic gas produced and regulated under the MPRDA. The MPRDA provisions that holders of a valid production right might explore, beneficiate, and sell their products is specifically relevant to these proposed changes. One must remember that in the amendment gas bill, reference is made to certain definitions which are already captured under the MPRDA. One must further be cognizant that the MPRDA is the instrument that has been mandated to regulate upstream activities, where an intended applicant for a production or exploration right follows the MPRDA provisions together, of course, with the NEMA regulatory requirements in order to obtain such a right. The problem is that the amendment bill seems to create a double regulatory dispensation, which is almost intended to regulate upstream activities under NERSA as regulator, as opposed to the DMRE as regulator. So, our problem or our proposal is that these definitions should be amended to explicitly exclude domestic gas across the value chain, provided the entity operating in the value chain is regulated under the MPRDA. And that is in far as it relates to upstream activities. If we then look at the definitions, other definitions of storage, trading, just look here, distribution, and transmission, to mention a few, we see that there's a reoccurring ambiguity. If you look, for instance, at where the definition of storage and transmission refers to upstream processes, including the pipelines, including the drilling, including the pipelines to the liquefaction plant, all of those. Those definitions are already captured under production right areas and related definitions in the MPRDA. So you have an existing regulatory framework that governs upstream activities. In addition, you have a proposed bill in place, the Upstream Resources Development Bill, that is to regulate upstream activities. So there's a clear potential of ambiguity and double regulation under the NERSA regime as well. And that must be looked at very, very carefully. If you look at specifics, I'll take you through example, the definition of storage. The amendment bill proposes changing the definition of storage from holding of gas as a service in the Gas Act to holding of gas in fixed infrastructure. Under the Gas Act, that is stored in pipelines which are used primarily for the transmission and distribution of gas is excluded from the definition of storage. The amendment bill proposes increasing the number of excluded activities such that gas stored for own use at transmission, distribution, liquefaction, or upstream pipeline, or where the primary purpose of such storage is for gas to be used in a production operation or in the manufacture of synthetic or artificial gas, is excluded from the definition of storage and accordingly would not require a storage license. So again, it is clear that the proposed definition might create an ambiguous licensing and regulatory regime for domestic gas produced and regulated, already regulated under the MPRDA. The MPRDA provisions that holders of a valid production right may explore, beneficiate, and sell their products is what needs to be the driver and the governance driver. The proposed definition should be amended to explicitly exclude domestic gas across the value chain. The same with, I'm not going to go through all the definitions in detail, but let's just take a few of them. The current definition of trading under the Gas Act is the purchase and sale of gas as a commodity by any person and any services associated therewith, excluding the construction and operation of transmission, storage, and distribution systems. The proposed definition of trading under the amendment bill, however, is the sale of gas to a reticulator, to an end consumer, and by a transmission company or a distribution company, and any activity incidental thereto, including the construction operation of trading infrastructure, and specifically states that the construction and operation of liquefaction or regasification, transmission, storage, and distribution facilities is excluded. So we again need to look at ways to redefine the definitions so that it clearly resorts either under the MPRDA as the overarching definition pool, then specifically linked upstream activities and their definitions to upstream legislation or legislation governing upstream, or it is in the process to be accepted as governing upstream activities. You cannot have a dual system where you already have an existing license to do all these things. Now you have to apply to the to NERSA and who will govern the very same activities. And that is our biggest fear. The same applies to distribution. The same also applies to transmission. So to summarize on the definition side, there needs to be a relook, a re-evaluation and review of the definitions. Currently, it creates an ambiguous dispensation where the same activities are covered under a multitude of statutory instruments. It needs to be horses for courses. And it is clear that the government's intention from a DMRE perspective is to amend the MPRDA to specifically cater that upstream activities are no longer covered under the minerals part of the MPRDA, but rather as a standalone under the proposed Upstream Petroleum Development Bill. And our our submission is that once that upstream development bill is created and the Gas Act in its current proposed format comes into effect, there's going to be a massive regulatory conflict between which act actually, or which regulator trumps each other. And there needs to be a very careful look at that. Then, Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen of the Portfolio Committee, in terms of Section 8, in terms of Section 15(1), the Gas Act also defines, if I just go back to the definitions of in the Gas Act, it defines production as the recovery, processing, treating, and gathering of gas from wells in the earth up to the boundary of the mine, or the manufacture of synthetic or artificial gas, or the manufacturing of any gases in the refining process up to the boundary of the factory, and any other activity incidental thereto. The definition is therefore wide enough to include any process of recovery, our emphasis, our submission, to include any process of recovery, processing, treatment, and gathering of gas within the boundary of a mine, including the physical process of liquefaction or regasification, which requires a license in terms of Section 15(1) of the Gas Act. The current definition of production is accordingly problematic, as it is unclear whether a production plant should be licensed in terms of the Gas Act simply because it relies on the process of liquefaction or regasification to process or gather gas from the earth, and which are activities that are, in any case, currently regulated by the NPRDA. So, given that the Gas Act regulates the secondary process of the transmission, storage, distribution, liquefaction, and regasification of gas, in our mind, the downstream activities, and not the primary process of the exploration for or production of gas, which are all upstream activities, it is unlikely that the legislator's intention was that any person involved in liquefaction or regasification activities that are used in the course of the primary process of the production of gas would require additional licensing requirements for the same activity under the Gas Act, especially since upstream activities are already regulated in terms of the NPRDA. The amendment bill further seeks to address any potential confusion by removing the definition of production and replacing it with the definition of production areas, production operation, and production right as defined in the NPRDA. The amendment bill also proposes including a definition for upstream pipeline, which is defined as a pipeline or one of a network of pipelines which is operated or constructed as part of operations carried out under the production right, or two, which is used to convey gas from a production area directly or indirectly to an upstream gas processing facility. The proposed definition of storage and transmissions in the amendment bill accordingly expressly exclude the storage and transport of gas by upstream pipeline. Therefore, under the amendment bill, it is clear that only the construction, conversion, or operation of liquefaction or regasification facilities involved in the downstream activities of the secondary process of the transmission, storage, distribution, liquefaction, and regasification of gas requires a license in terms of the amendment bill. And that's where we again reiterate that this will cause not only from a regulatory, but also from an implementation and even pre-application, a planning process, it will create ambiguity. Remember, the drive is to work towards a single systems, single regulatory systems, the one environmental system. But we cannot have three different legislative instruments regulating the same activity. Then I want to take you to section 15B1 of the amendment bill that talks around registration. And the amendment bill as such proposes an increase in the number of people obliged to register with NERSA and therefore be exempted from applying for and holding a license as per Schedule 1 for the performance of certain activities such as people involved in the exportation or importation of gas, not to be confused with production or importation of gas, purchasing gas and as an eligible customer, engaged in the transmission or distribution of gas. I'm going to jump ahead to the problem here. The Gas Act does not prescribe a time period for registration, so it was hoped that the amendment bill would provide more clarity as to how long an application for registration would take. Unfortunately, the amendment bill has not provided any time periods. Neither the pipe gas regulations nor the rules published in terms of the Gas Act prescribe a time period. So we are hoping that that could be amended. Then in terms of a very important aspect, we jump to tariffs. I will come back if I've got more time to exclusivity. But currently, the position under Section 4H of the Gas Act is that NERSA must monitor and approve and, if necessary, regulate the transmission and storage tariffs. Section 41M, read with Section 22B of the Amendment Bill, however, proposes that NERSA must regulate all tariffs and maximum prices that may be charged by a license.
Just a reminder, 2 minutes left.
Yeah, in order to recover its investment so that the licensee would recover its investment, recover its prudently and efficiently incurred costs, and make a profit. Our problem, Mr. Chairman, is that it cannot be a discretionary mandatory requirement only from NERSA's perspective. You cannot create a mandatory single maximum tariff approach applicable to all holders and tell them how to recover their investment or how to make profit. That is their prerogative. So what we are hoping is that there will be an amendment that reflects that the maximum tariff structure and or any other tariff structure must be agreed in concurrence with the holders and licensees. So to summarize, Mr. Chairman, the most important part is in order to develop this market effectively, a free trade concept should be allowed to flourish. The investor will need to make sure that their product is competitively priced against other sources of product or alternatives of their product. If not, their target customers will simply not procure their tariff. So a lot of more work needs to go in there. In conclusion, we need to look at the definitions again to align it with other legislative, existing legislative requirements. Two, we need to make sure that certain aspects like tariff determination is done in concurrence with the licensee. And that thirdly, there is not a system of dual licensing or a replica of license application. It must be one system that is driven for upstream activities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Pa Tangi. Kalebucha. Honorable members, in the same vein, we have that for presentation from what is it? I don't want to call names that are not, from South Durban. I nearly said South Basin, so that's why South Durban. There was a Center for Environmental Rights. There was Miss Marilyn Lilly, and then there was Tetra 4. Any, in the same way, which clarities would want any clarities that would need, that might help yourselves as committee members when you deliberate? Going one. Yes, Mr. Mahlaule.
Thank you very much, Chair. Greetings to you, greetings to my colleagues, and greetings to the department. And I greet all those who made presentations as well as the observers. Chair, just one to South Durban. Towards the conclusion of the presentation, she mentioned that she doesn't believe that we have been, or there has been a conduct of proper, she termed proper and effective public participation. Now, the question would be, which I think will help the committee, what in her view constitute proper and effective public hearing, different to what we have been doing, different to what we are doing, and different to what we will be doing next year? Thank you very much.
Okay, any other one? Okay, in the absence, can I give the South Durban? But I thought what they were saying was that first, they mentioned the number of areas, for an example, in KZN that they should have been touched, we should have touched based with. 1, 2, the choice of the venue. 3, which I think that's what they were saying critically, was that the department, as far as they know, has not done any interaction with the public, and they believe that it should have been the department on its own should have conducted public hearings on the proposed amendment bill. But I don't want to get employment through the back door. South Durban.
Thanks, Chair. I think, yes, just to respond to those public participation questions, exactly what you said, we were concerned with the venue choice. KZN being such a large province, there were only 2 venues chosen, and the location of the venue in Durban wasn't easily accessible to the masses. And specifically in our case, we were approached literally the week before the public hearing by the office, I think it was an education officer. And I did send a letter in beforehand last week to the office to say that we were very upset by this approach, because we were requested a week before that we were going to get education materials, which we needed to hand out to the community or give contacts for them to hand out. And we found a week was not sufficient for communities to engage with material that's contained within a bill. And these are ordinary people. They need to have one-on-one discussions or public forum that can actually explain it. So in terms of maybe road shows, knock and drop approach, we didn't see any advertising in the local papers. And when I did go to the Durban hearing, which wasn't, there were people attending, but there was no diversity in the attendance. So I wanted to also find out, how did these people even hear about it? And the documentation there that was available, we only had English, when we know the majority of our speakers in KZN speak isiZulu. So it's things like that that we felt should have been better planned. We need that time frame for communities to engage with the material, because they need to understand the detail as well, because this is a piece of legislation that affects the masses and the environment, and it can't just be pushed through. It has to be effective, inclusive, and quite thorough at this level. And so that was what we meant by effective public participation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, ma'am. Look, I see there's Gabrielle. Is it you, ma'am?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add and echo to what Cassandra's just mentioned. Right before the first set of public hearings, the Centre for Environmental Rights, on behalf of Groundwork, wrote a letter to yourself, Chair, and the PCC regarding the public participation processes and the view that Groundwork and CER took, that it was inadequate time for preparation for presentations at that first set of public hearing. It was a week notice. So I think Cassandra has very adequately expressed the views of CBOs, and I just want to say thank you and to echo that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, look, I wanted us to deal so that we are not accused tomorrow, to deal with those that the questions were directed to, that would have made a presentation, but that's okay. It's safe to say, I think from a point of view from where we sit, we have responded both at the venue when we were there Saturday. We did explain the question of securing the venue, and unfortunately, it is beyond a committee of parliament to secure the venue. You get the venue that is being made available by the municipality. I even made an example. I said we would have preferred to go to one of the second biggest townships in South Africa, which is Umlazi. But when people in Umlazi are not giving us a venue, we can't go to Umlazi. If we can't get the city hall in Durban, we're told it's full, there's nothing we can do. We get the venue that is supplied to us. But let's leave those issues. I'm definitely sure we all know that we've got a recourse when we are dissatisfied, including with the answer that is provided by the committee on behalf of the committee. If members don't have any questions, can I then say that we'll still continue with this oral submission based on written submissions with other stakeholders that have written to us? Secondly, we have not finished the leg of public consultation. We're still gonna go to other 4 provinces. And I must repeat again to everyone, unfortunately, we go according to the guidance of Parliament. The time allocated, the areas where the period that we could spend, which is the same way. Committees of Parliament have got an allocated time and an allocated day. We are one of the few, if I were to say lucky committees, that this committee meets almost every Tuesday, depending whether Parliament is not in recess. If Parliament in recess, no committee can convene. That's in essence, this committee meets or is supposed to meet twice a week, which is on a Thursday from 9 to 12 and on a Friday from 9 to 12, depending again whether there is no house sitting on a Friday. If there's house sitting on a Friday, we will have to make alternative. Equally, even on a Tuesday, if the house sitting is starting early at 10, it means the committee may not sit, or it will have to sit between 9 and 9:45. Unfortunately, those are technical things that I explained in many of these areas. We can't bore people about them. As a committee, we don't meet as and when we wish. We meet as and when we are granted permission to meet. So you make an application for every meeting that you are going to have. It must get an approval. It must be included on the set list so that it can be known that in the public that the committee will be meeting. So we would love to do some of the things. Unfortunately, as I'm saying, we have to follow what the rules on committees of Parliament says. On that note, we don't want us to, I don't think it will be fair to sit and make a judgment on your presentation. You are doing this in order to influence the thinking of members of the committee, but also at the same time is that when the committee would have finalized its work, you also seek to influence some of the members of parliament or members of the National Assembly in this case, who might be watching and listening, so that in the event the committee finalizes this report, it takes it to the, as I outlined, we have to take it now to Parliament, to the National Assembly, with the recommendations of what the committee is saying. If it gets adopted by the National Assembly, then it will have to go to the National Council of Provinces. If it is not, then it means it will have to find another way. Either it gets referred back to the department. I'm not sure whether that is possible, but the point is, you are shaping us to say, as you go and look at these things. That is why I said in some of these visits we had, I don't believe in the principle of public public hearings. I believe in the principle of public consultation. Public hearings could mean we go, we listen, or we hear you, and that's it. But consultation, it means we hear you and we seek to act on some of the things that you are making us aware. And unfortunately, as I say that, it does not necessarily mean we must listen to even what we may not necessarily be in agreement. On that note, can I then say we will be meeting, excuse my fact that I'm in a very bad space as far as network is concerned, so I had to reinforce network by not showing the view. To other normal circumstances, you should know and see the person who's presiding over your meeting. It might happen that you are sitting with Minnie Vanelli. You hear the voices, but the actual person is mimicking. So please bear with me. That one I must extend my apologies. We will then, with the others, meet on Friday. What time, Ari and Ayanda?
At 9 o'clock again, Chair.
Yeah, Friday, 9 o'clock. We are continuing with the other team. Thank you very much. The meeting stands adjourned.
Recording stopped.